Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're dissecting a true crime story that literally changed the course of human history. I mean, imagine trying to pull off a heist, but your target is the single most powerful man on the planet. Today we're looking at the anatomy of an assassination, specifically the murder of Julius Caesar on the infamous Ides of March. Now, this isn't just some dusty ancient history. It's an absolute masterclass in power, ego, and conspiracy.
Okay, let's dive into this. The date is March 15th, 44 BC. We're in Rome, specifically a place called the Curia of Pompeii. Now, you might be wondering, why aren't they at the usual Senate house over in the Roman Forum? Well, it's actually undergoing renovations, and ironically enough, it's being rebuilt in Caesar's name, so it's totally unavailable. Instead, the Senate is meeting here, secluded at the eastern point of a massive, open courtyard known as the Portico of Pompeii. It's a pretty isolated spot. There's literally no direct access to the side streets of Rome, and the only exits lead straight out onto the portico. Inside this room, you've got dozens of nervous senators milling about, all keeping a very close eye on a golden ceremonial chair sitting empty at the front, just waiting for Rome's dictator.
And the tension in this room, it is absolutely suffocating. Completely unbeknownst to the dictator, daggers have been secretly smuggled right into the Curia. How do they pull that off? They hid them inside these innocuous little wooden boxes that were usually used to carry writing tablets for record keeping. The assassins have quietly retrieved these blades and are now concealing them underneath their togas. Meanwhile, just outside the building, there's a large group of armed gladiators kind of awkwardly loitering around trying to look inconspicuous. They've been strategically placed there to cover the exits, making sure that if Caesar somehow manages to fight his way out, he definitely won't get far.
Part 1. Context and Rise to Power. Let's look at Caesar's ascent.
To truly understand this chaotic crime scene, we really have to ask, how did Caesar end up in the crosshairs in the first place? Why would his own peers want to violently murder him? Well, let's trace his rapid accumulation of power. Over an almost 40-year career, Caesar proved himself to be a total military genius, conquering modern-day France and Belgium. He got incredibly wealthy and, crucially, built an army that was loyal only to him. By 49 BC, the Roman Senate and his chief rival, a guy named Pompey the Great, were terrified he was becoming larger than Rome itself. They actually tried to strip him of his military command, but instead of stepping down, Caesar made a fateful point-of-no-return decision. He marched a legion of his soldiers straight across the Rubicon River. By blatantly ignoring Roman law, he kicked off a massive 4-year civil war. He won that war by 45 BC, completely defeating Pompey. And finally, in February of 44 BC, the Senate granted him an ultimate, totally unprecedented title, dictator for life.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core of the problem. You see, hundreds of years prior, Rome had violently overthrown its last tyrannical king. The conservative aristocracy made a literal vow that no king would ever rule Rome again. Yet, just look at Caesar's behavior here. He starts strutting around in these opulent royal garbs. He's throwing up statues of himself in public spaces. He even successfully renamed his birth month from Quintilis to Julius. So yeah, the reason you're sweating in July today is pretty much entirely because of this guy's ego. And of course, he plops that golden chair right smack in the middle of the Senate. To Rome's elite, he wasn't just holding all the power. He was rubbing their noses in it. He was acting exactly like a king.
This blatant, in-your-face flaunting of power sparked a massive 60-man conspiracy. And what's wild is how incredibly diverse their motives were. You had disgruntled former allies who felt they hadn't gotten a big enough slice of the pie. You had pardoned Pompeian faction rivals, guys Caesar had defeated in the Civil War but mercifully, and honestly perhaps a bit foolishly, let live. And then you had the principled Republicans, these old-school conservative aristocrats who were terrified that Caesar's centralization of power was going to completely obliterate the state's Republican values. So for months, these 60 men met in the shadows, piecing together this deadly puzzle to hatch their plot.
Part 2. Anatomy of a Conspiracy. Planning the Murder.
Now, plotting to kill the undisputed most powerful man in the world? Yeah, that's no easy feat. It required meticulous, literal heist-level planning. The conspirators debated some wildly different ideas before they finally settled on their strategy. They thought about a public attack right on the Via Sacra, which was a major Roman street. They tossed around the idea of just flinging him off a bridge to armed men waiting in the water below. They even seriously debated ambushing him at a gladiator show, literally posing as gladiators themselves so they could hide in plain sight. But they ended up abandoning all of these. Why? Because while Caesar didn't keep formal bodyguards on payroll while he was in the city, he always surrounded himself with a huge, incredibly intimidating entourage of friends. Striking out in public meant anyone nearby could instantly spring to his defense.
So, why did they ultimately choose the Senate on the 15th of March? Honestly, it was a stroke of strategic genius. First of all, the timing. Caesar was scheduled to leave Rome shortly after this date for a massive military campaign in the east. They absolutely had to strike before you won more battles and accumulated even more untouchable glory. Second, the venue itself. Inside the Senate, it was strictly legally prohibited to carry weapons. Every single person, including Caesar's fiercest, toughest allies, would be completely unarmed, which made any real resistance highly unlikely. It allowed the conspirators to isolate him and deal with him subtly, totally closed off from the prying eyes of the public and that informal protection squad.
Part 3. Omens, Warnings, and a Fatal Ego.
What makes this story so gripping, almost like a movie, is the eerie, practically supernatural build-up to the event. It really highlights just how incredibly preventable this tragedy was if you look at the absurdly specific warnings Caesar received. A month before the murder, a fortune teller named Spurina sacrificed an animal and literally couldn't find its heart in the chest cavity, a famously terrible omen. The very next day, a different sacrifice was missing part of its liver. She explicitly told Caesar he was going to come to great harm by the Ides of March. Then, jump to the night before the murder. The doors and windows in his bedroom inexplicably fly open in the middle of the night. His wife Calpurnia wakes up totally terrified, begging him not to go to the Senate because she just had a nightmare that their house collapsed and she was holding his bloodied, lifeless corpse. Even Caesar's own personal seers conducted rituals that morning and reported nothing but bad omens. The mounting signs were so intense that they actually unnerved even a hardcore, non-superstitious guy like Caesar. He actually made the call to postpone the meeting.
And, just let this quote sink in for a second. The historian Plutarch tells us that the day before the 15th, Caesar was just having a casual chat with a fellow senator about, of all things, the best way to die. Caesar's response? A death which is unexpected. I really want you to consider the deep, chilling, dramatic irony of that statement, considering he said it mere hours before he was butchered by his own colleagues.
So if he had actually decided to cancel the meeting, why on earth did he end up going? Well, fatal errors driven entirely by his own ego. A trusted friend, a guy who was literally named second in Caesar's own will, named Decimus Brutus, paid him a visit that morning. Decimus masterfully manipulated Caesar's pride. He basically asked, hey, wouldn't it look incredibly ridiculous and cowardly if you, the great Caesar, didn't show your face simply because of a woman's bad dream? What's that going to do to your grand reputation? And Caesar's ego won out. He went. And on his way to the Curia, a man on the street literally shoved a scroll into his hand detailing the exact plot against him. But Caesar, he never read it. He walked straight into the trap, physically holding his own life-saving warning in his hand. Truly unbelievable.
Part 4. The climax. The trap is sprung.
Which brings us right back to those tense, quiet shadows of the Curia of Pompeii. The dictator has arrived. Let's walk through the brutal mechanics of this ambush step by step. Step 1. Isolation. Caesar arrives with his co-consul Mark Antony, who is a big, brawny, battle-hardened guy, fiercely loyal to Caesar. A conspirator named Trebonius intentionally pulls Antony aside, just outside the doors to distract him, taking Rome's best defender completely off the board. Step 2. The signal. Inside, Senator Cimber approaches Caesar, loudly demanding a pardon for his exiled brother. Dozens of other senators rise and start circling Caesar like sharks. Cimber then thrusts out his fist, grabs Caesar's toga, and tears it down, revealing his tunic. Step 3. The strike. Startled, Caesar recoils. From behind, Senator Casca strikes the very first blow, a dagger thrust that just grazes Caesar's shoulder.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is Caesar's immediate reaction. He doesn't just give up and surrender. He rises in total shock, twirls around, and allegedly stabs Casca right back with his writing pen in a desperate act of self-defense. But alas, the pen is definitely not mightier than the sword in this case. Within seconds, he's completely enveloped by this suffocating shroud of togas, collapsing under a chaotic hail of daggers. A couple of loyalists try to break through the mob to save him, but they get aggressively shoved back. And it's right then that Marcus Brutus, one of the leading conspirators, and famously a man Caesar had previously pardoned and mentored, steps right forward and stabs Caesar in the groin, delivering a truly brutal, humiliating blow right in the middle of the frenzy. 23. Just pause on that number for a moment. The sheer brutality, the wild, chaotic frenzy of this mob of senators resulted in 23 stab wounds. When it was finally over, the crowd of assassins literally stepped back, panting, to admire their grisly work. The would-be king, the tyrant, was dead.
And here is a detail of just profound poetic irony. As Caesar bled out on the cold stone floor, the very last thing he likely saw was the towering statue of Pompey the Great staring down at him almost mockingly. Pompey was his chief rival back in the Civil War. Caesar had defeated him, but in a grand show of grace and mercy, he had explicitly refused to tear down Pompey's statues. That very act of mercy provided the literal backdrop for his own violent demise.
Part 5. Death and the Empire. The Fall of the Republic. Now, the assassins genuinely thought they were heroes saving the Republic, but history had a much, much darker plan in store. Their grand goal was an absolute failure. The assassination instantly ripped open a massive power vacuum. Rather than restoring democracy, it prompted Caesar's young adoptive son Octavian to form a ruthless alliance with Mark Antony and Marcus Lepidus. Together, they systematically hunted down every single man who had a hand in murdering Caesar and completely crushed anyone who opposed their rule. The very act that was designed to save the Republic ended up triggering the bloody civil wars that ultimately destroyed it forever, paving the way for the rise of a hereditary monarchy under the Roman Empire.
Let's move to this comparison, because it's a brilliant masterclass in political survival. Octavian, who would soon become Rome's first emperor, clearly took notes on his adoptive father's fatal mistakes. You see, Caesar's big flaw was this weird mix of mercy and vanity. He pardoned his enemies, he even promoted some of them, and then he flaunted his absolute power brazenly with the golden chairs and the royal robes. He made people hate him, but not necessarily fear him. Octavian took the exact opposite approach. He ruthlessly destroyed his enemies, making sure there were no Pompeys or Brutuses left alive to stab him in the back. And crucially, he never, ever flaunted his power. He hid his absolute iron-fisted control right behind a comfortable veil of ancient Roman tradition.
So the crucial point is beautifully summarized here by the historian John Balsden. He notes that if an authoritarian government was going to be established successfully in the Republic's place, quote, "It must not be like Caesar's, an inconsiderate, careless, and frank authoritarianism. It must wear a republican mask, however false." Octavian survived and ruled for decades because he pretended the Republic was still happily functioning, even while he personally held all the absolute power. Which brings us to our final thought for today. The blood spilled on the Ides of March fundamentally changed how power is wielded in human history. It taught future leaders that naked, obvious ambition is incredibly dangerous, and that the illusion of democracy is often the strongest armor an autocrat can wear. So, I want to leave you with this provocative question to ponder. Do modern political figures still wear this Republican mask today? Think about that for a while. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history that shapes our world.